Great. So this is
Yep.
Mike Levin on Wednesday, May 8th. From home, it looks like.
I'm at home today. Yeah.
Yeah, me
Yep.
too. Me too. Well, I thought this Selves piece was absolutely fascinating. Just
Oh, thank you.
fireworks of ideas coming off it. Just very rich. So I'd love to ask you a few questions about it, just to
Yes.
unpack it, and then we
Sure.
can take it from there.
Sure. Sure.
First of all, connect this thinking in this piece to your lab work. What brought you to these thoughts, and
Yeah.
what were you seeing that made you want to answer the questions you answer in this piece?
Yeah. Great question. Let's see, a couple of things. First, I am really interested in information and how information is used by different components of the living body. So, Josh Bongard and I have been developing this notion of polycomputing, which is this idea that basically every subcomponent is hacking every other subcomponent in the sense that it doesn't know or care what the original intent of the message was. It's going to interpret it as best as it can, however it can.
When you say
And so,
it, are you talking about organisms? What are you talking about?
oh, well, every level. So cells,
Okay,
subcellular
got it.
protein networks, pathways, organs, tissues, anthills, everything.
Right.
I think this is a fundamental feature of biology, that it's a hacker in that sense, that you have no allegiance to how something was intended to be used. You're going to do the best you can in interpreting what, and that comes from some working with Josh Bongard with his discoveries, that the exact same physical mechanism can be seen by one observer to be computing one function and another observer to be computing a different function. So
Oh, fascinating.
that when you ask it, what is this physical process computing, somebody might say, well, I know what it is. I wrote the algorithm, so I can tell you what it is. But in biology, nobody cares who wrote the algorithm. Well,
No
I don't care.
authorship.
Yeah, well, I don't care what you say. I'm interpreting your algorithm, your novel, your message in my own way. Whatever it doesn't matter to me what you think you meant by it. I get whatever I get out of it is what I get out of it.
Right.
Anyway, so it starts with that, and attempts to understand how different biological systems interpret information. And I was thinking, okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is, I really think that there's a lot of important work to be done to break binary categories that we naively think exist, but actually are just hiding a lot of limits on our imagination. And so this notion of data versus the machine that operates on that data, and this idea that information is passive, and then you have this active a cognitive being, whatever it is, that's going to operate on that data, remember it, store it, change it, whatever. And so I was thinking about ways that we could break that and really make that into a continuum. And I was thinking about the whole caterpillar butterfly thing, and I thought about this for many years. And originally the thing you might think is cool about it is the question of, well, where's the information, because the brain gets mostly refactored. Okay, but then it hit me. I was taking a walk with my dad, and I was thinking about this, and it hit me that isn't the most interesting part here. What's interesting is that the actual the details of the information that the caterpillar learns are actually quite useless to the butterfly, because it's going to have to remap all of it onto a completely different body with different priorities. It doesn't care about leaves anymore. It
Right.
lives in a three-dimensional world. Like, all of that has to get remapped. And so immediately I sort of realized that what's going on here is what's preserved across lifetimes from that caterpillar to that butterfly is not the fidelity of the information. It's a kind of inferred salience. It's what does this mean to me? And that what's actually passed on physically, some sort of engram. We don't know what it is. It could be an RNA, like Glanzman says.
What's an engram? Would you define that term for me?
Yeah, an engram is just it's a physical embodiment of a memory. So it's anything in your brain or body that stores information, and all that means is that there is some observer later on, meaning a cell, a tissue, the whole animal, or a scientist or somebody else, who's going to then look at that physical object and say, "Oh, look, I know what this means. This is," and they're going to interpret this as a memory. And so ants
Is
leave.
DNA an engram or not?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think so. But now again, that requires a real shift. I think most biologists would say no, but I think it is, because I think that all memories are just messages from your past self, and that what's happening with DNA is that previous, basically there's this giant lineage agent that's the scale of an evolutionary lineage, and the DNA are its engrams where that information is being passed on the way that any memory would. And much like these other memories, it's up for interpretation, which is why you have this incredible flexibility of forms. Yeah, you've got the same DNA, but if you're a salamander and I change the number of cells or the size of cells, or do all this other crazy stuff, you can still make things work because you don't interpret, you take it seriously, but not literally that information.
Right. Got
so
it.
right, so yeah, so this,
going back to the butterfly, yeah.
Yeah. So the engrams, right, that are left there are to be interpreted, and that leads to this question of, and again, the reason. So get back to your original question. Well, what does it mean for our lab work? Because what we would like to do is effectively communicate with the different parts of the biology. I mean, what we do is we communicate with cells, tissues, and organs for regenerative medicine applications. Some people are going to want to communicate with ecosystems. Somebody else is going to want to communicate with, social structures or financial structures. I don't know what. And so we're interested in asking, how does, by understanding how does a persistent agent, a self, maintain itself over time, you can learn something about how do we communicate with it. So we would like to rewrite those memories, and we would like to say if there's a birth defect or there's some kind of traumatic injury or something, and we want the cells to build something else, we really need to understand how these memories are interpreted. So that's why, that's why this is of relevance to us.
So in the butterfly case, would you say there is a self that's continuous from caterpillar to butterfly?
So here's what I think we ought to do with this, and this is by no means a new idea. This is kind of just process philosophy, and made more practical in many ways. There's an old paradox, and I'm trying to figure out who first said it. I thought it was Bateson, but I could be wrong. But somebody had this paradox that said, if a species fails to change, then it will no doubt eventually go extinct. If it does change, then again, it's not the same species, and so again, it's gone. So what do you do? What's the right? What can you do? That's the paradox, and that same paradox is it's the same thing with us, because in a certain sense, if you insist on a definition of the self that is a permanent structure, it's a thing, then you've got the same paradox, because if I mature, if I learn, if I expand, if I any of those things, I'm no longer me, and that's scary. And at some point, is the child that you once were still here? I mean, in many ways, no, right? So that's a problem. But I think the answer, both on the personal case and the evolutionary case, is that what we need to do is define the self as a continuous construction of sense making. So it's a process. It's not a single thing. So that part isn't new. Plenty of people have said that. But I think the new thing is to understand exactly what it's doing. What I think it's doing is constantly trying to make sense of its own memories. So and I don't know what 300 milliseconds out, in a human, I don't know what it would be exactly, but you don't have access to your past. What you have access to is the engrams left by your past. You have the messages from your past self. So this constant process of trying to make sense of what do these chemical messengers mean, if it's RNA or it's protein, whatever, synaptic structures, whatever it's going to be. What do they mean? Can I cobble together a coherent story of myself, my past, my environment, and be creative about it? The other thing that hit me that's, I think, really cool about this is that, and we could talk later about this bow tie business, but in any case, what's happening is you have a bunch of experiences, and you don't memorize the details. You have to squeeze them down. You have to compress them into some sort of a inference, a generative, a model that's of everything that happened, right? So when it comes time to interpret this thing, to recall the memory, because it's compressed, you have to sort of reinflate it, and you have to make it make sense for your new environment. Maybe you've changed or whatever. You have to reinflate it. But the thing is that good compression always looks like randomness. This is something that the SETI people point out, that a really advanced signal is going to look maximally random, because when you compress lots of particulars into a general rule, the whole point of compression is to throw out all the correlations. Anything that's correlated, you can get rid of it, because you can compress it out. But once you've done all of that, what you have looks really random. And so that means that on the interpretation end, when you look at these molecules or synaptic structures or whatever it is, in order to figure out what they mean, you can't deduce it in a deductive algorithm because the information isn't there. It's been stripped off. You have to be creative. It's more creativity and maybe what people call intuition. I don't know, but it's much more about you have to bring something to it. You can't just read exactly what it says because
Right.
it's sparse. There's very little there.
Why? Now, tell me exactly why do you have to compress?
You
Is
have to
it just a
compress.
bandwidth question, or?
Well, because if you don't compress, all learning is about compression. Because if you don't compress, then what you've done is what the machine learning folks call overtraining. You've memorized a bunch of particulars, and if you're a very simple organism in a very simplified environment, that might even be okay. But normally the whole point of learning is you learn a rule. You don't remember
I see.
there were these pixels on my retina, then there were those pixels on my retina. You don't remember that. What you remember is this general thing leads to this other general thing, right? You remember these connections.
So
And you
you're
have
abstracting.
exactly, that's what it is. It's generalization and abstraction. That's exactly what it is.
And that seems to me what's happened in the caterpillar butterfly case, right?
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean,
Yes.
so in the experiment that you described, it wasn't. I realized it wasn't yours though. It was somebody else's experiment.
Yeah. It's not my
Yeah.
experiment. It was first done in the 70s by a bunch of Russian groups who did larvae to beetle and things like that. And then it was done by Doug Blackiston, who is actually a staff scientist in my center, but he did this work when he was younger. And yeah, he did it with caterpillar to moths.
And he did it. There was some training, some operant conditioning going on,
Yep.
right? To
Yes.
associate food with a certain color.
Yep.
And so the abstraction there, or the result of the compression, was concept food, right? Rather than specific leaf or nectar.
Well, it's two things, right? It's actually multiple things because it's yes, we're not remembering leaves because butterfly doesn't care about leaves, but also what do you do? Because um, the caterpillar is a soft-bodied creature, and the way you move a soft body, you don't have any hard elements to push on, so you can't do robotics the same way. You can't do controlling the same way. So there's a certain set of muscular motions that you need to do to make your way over to where the leaves are. That isn't going to help the butterfly. The butterfly doesn't move like that. It's got a completely different architecture. And so the abstraction there is from leaves to food, or maybe even, we don't know, it might even just be to pleasure or something, just positive affect, or
Right.
who knows, right?
Right.
But also how do we make use of that associative learning that this color leads to food or to to pleasure or whatever? How do we remap that on a completely different controller? And you see this even in vertebrates, like this is and actually this was Doug's work too, is we can make tadpoles with eyes on their tails and they can see perfectly well. And so it's like, isn't that amazing that with no extra evolutionary cycles, no adaptation, out of the box, this thing that for millions of years had the exact, the brain could rely on getting connection from the visual system into the optic tectum and all that. Suddenly it's on your tail, no problem. It connects to the spinal cord, didn't even connect to the brain. It makes it work. So
What's
I think
happened
that's,
there, do you think? How do you think that, what's been remapped? What's been remembered and forgotten?
I think that all of these, and there's tons of these examples that I go through in various papers, is the reason that life is so tolerant to these crazy kind of changes is that it fundamentally assumes the material is unreliable. In other words, unlike all of our
The
computer technology,
information, the information,
the substrate, it
substrate.
assumes
Okay.
that the substrate is unreliable. Because look, this is how we build our computer technology. You make the bottom layer as absolutely rock solid as you possibly can, so
Right.
that all of the stuff on top of it can assume that everything is going to go well at the bottom. When you
Right.
write code, you don't think your transistors are going to burn out. You don't worry about that. And
Right.
so the goal is to change to keep the information from changing. And this is why actually that whole business of these microchips, right? How small can you make a microchip? It's because you don't want the bits floating. When they get too close to each other, they start to fluctuate, the quantum effects start to fluctuate. You don't want that. You want all the bits to be exactly what they were before. You want fidelity of the information. Biology can't operate that way because everything is going to change. So on a small time scale, your proteins are going to degrade, your cells are going to die and be replaced. On a larger scale, you're going to be mutated. Yeah, right. Evolution, guaranteed you're going to be mutated and things will change, not just environment, but also your own parts. So I think that there may be exceptions. There may be organisms that aren't like that, although I doubt it. I think at this point, what survived and what biology strongly emphasizes is architectures where you assume the underlying material is unreliable. And what you're going to do is on the fly, you don't overtrain on your priors. You don't assume that the future is going to be like the past. You don't assume you know what any of your information means. You are going to try to reinterpret it at any given moment on the fly and do the best you can. And so that gives rise to these kinds of systems where the eye's in the wrong place. Well, we can do something with that, basically, right? I mean, the detail is it's hard work to figure out. Okay, so where is the information actually going? It gets onto the spinal cord, then the brain learns to infer some connection between what the eye says and does it even know it's an eye? Well, I'm not even sure about that. So, but I think that's what's happening here is that biology commits to a real-time sense-making process, not to the expectations of the past. I think that's the most interesting part, and that's what makes this stuff so flexible, and that's what makes biotechnology possible. It makes I'll take my cells and slap them onto some weird scaffold made out of crazy nanomaterials, and I'll instrumentize it with electrical signaling and optical whatever, and things work because
So the butterfly has solved this problem of how can I change and still can I change and still exist? Which
I think we all do. I mean, the butterfly is kind of an egregious case, but all of us have the same problem because over time we are not the same, and whether it be the rearrangements of puberty or just the day-to-day wear and tear on the body, the whole ship of Theseus thing, right, where your
right.
materials are going in and out all the time. I think different species emphasize this to different extent. For example, planaria are the champions of this. I mean, look, planaria, right? Cancer resistant, incredibly regenerative, no aging in the asexual forms,
Right.
no transgenic lines because they basically ignore new DNA that you put into them. There are no transgenic. Yeah, there's no for people have been trying this since I think since the late 80s. People have been trying to make transgenic planaria. There aren't any. No mutant lines. The only lines of aberrant planaria that exist are our two-headed form and the cryptic form, and they're not genetic. It's because the only reason it works is because it's not genetic. What happened in planaria, I think, is that they because they reproduce asexually, so they tear themselves in half and regenerate. That means that they accumulate somatic mutations. They don't clean the genome the way that we do with sexual reproduction, and so they've accumulated so much junk that basically the only way to have a proper planarian is to assume the hardware is going to be unreliable, and to put all of the effort. And we've done computational models of this actually, and you can see evolution doing this when you get even a little bit of regulative competency where the creature can make up for certain subtle defects. Immediately evolution it's hard for selection to now see the genomes, right? Because if you get an animal that looks pretty good, do you look pretty good because your genome was great, or because you actually it's terrible but you fixed it along the way, right? And so this is like the stuff that we see when we make tadpoles with the scrambled faces, and they see them, they fix them, right? So what happens is that then when evolution has a hard time selecting for good genomes, all the effort goes into selecting for more competency, which in turn makes it harder to see the genome, which in turn makes for more. And so you get this thing where the pressure on the genome actually flattens out, but the pressure on the competency keeps rising. And so if you take that all the way, you end up with planaria that basically everything went into making an algorithm, which is partially bioelectric and who knows what else, that basically says, I already know my hardware can't really be trusted. Here are all the error correcting codes and everything else that we need to do to build a good planarian no matter what happens. And then of course you're insensitive to transgenes, to cancer, all these things, because you're assuming from day one that all that stuff can't be trusted.
Right.
And I think so planaria are kind of all the way there, and then salamanders are pretty good at it but not as good as planaria, and then mammals, and then maybe something like C. elegans or Drosophila are on the opposite end, and they're just really pretty hardwired, maybe.
So your definition of self, how far down the evolutionary ladder does it go? I mean, does it go to single-celled creatures? Are they selves, or does it go, or does it begin at a certain point in evolution, the self as an innovation to deal with these problems you're talking about?
Yeah. I don't like binary categories for any of these things, because they end up chasing us into these pseudo problems where you can always come up with these sort of in between cases, and then you spend all your time trying to prop up this binary definition, as opposed to I think what all of these
Binary here
work.
between having a self and not having a self. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
So
I
it's
think
on a
what
continuum.
I think all of it will yes, I think it's on a continuum, but the reason it's on a continuum is that I take all of these terms, so all of this, having a self, intelligent, sentient, cognitive, like all the whatever of these terms you want to use. I don't think they're about the system itself. I think what they refer to is your intended interaction with it. So if you tell me that you think a certain system
As
has,
an observer, as a scientist, okay.
as a scientist, as a conspecific, as a parasite, as a whatever. It's every agent with living, non-living, scientific, natural, whatever. You are going to take some stance towards whatever you want to interact with. And if you want to take a mechanical stance and say all I see is a bunch of cogs and gears, the tools I have to interact with you are just hardware rewiring. Well, that works well for mechanical clocks and things like that. You try to apply it to a human. If you're an orthopedic surgeon, not bad. If you're a psychotherapist, terrible. Right. So you want an or a spouse, terrible. You want an orthopedic surgeon that thinks you're a mechanical machine. You do not want a spouse or a psychotherapist that thinks you're a mechanical machine. So I think all of these things just indicate the frame that you bring to the interaction and the set of tools you're going to use. And so you got your rewiring, you've got cybernetics, control theory, behaviorism, you've got I don't know, psychoanalysis, spirituality, who knows, like I'm just sort of drawing the spectrum, right? So how far down does it go? So so what that means is, can we get some sort of utility? And that's why I harp on the engineering side of this, because I think this should all be tested by utility in the real world. So can we get some sort of utility by applying these concepts to single cells? Absolutely, I think yes. Can we apply them to molecular networks? Yes, within cells, I think so. We have data on this. Other people have data on this. Could we apply them to particles? Maybe. So I think Chris Fields and Carl Friston and some other people have done some really nice work trying to cash out physics as a kind of proto-cognitive substrate, like active. I mean, they like active inference. There may be some other things. So maybe.
So I was going to ask you too if you thought this was limited to the realm of biology. I realize Friston doesn't.
Yeah.
But I don't know. He doesn't. His work seems to all perform better when you transpose it to the realm of biology than when he starts talking about active inference in rocks and crystals and things. Where I don't see the active piece.
Well, okay. I couldn't possibly reproduce the argument the way that he does it, but I think what he's saying is that. And Chris Fields has stories about this too, which is basically that there's an equivalency between what is a thing, what is a rock, what is a right, I mean, I think that's a very important part of the research program, and this idea that the active inference is quite symmetrical. When you're doing something to the environment is also learning about you, and so on. And I think the claim there is that there is a very simple version of this that just basically looks like physics to us, but if you sort of crank up the relevant parameters, then you end up with things we call life. So here's what I would say about that. I think when we say biological world, what do we really mean, right? What's life? I think that what we mean by life is anything that is good at scaling up the cognitive light cone. That is anything that where the whole has a larger is capable of pursuing larger and more complex goals than the parts. That's what we happen to call life. So we don't do that for rocks, because the rock has exactly the same cognitive light cone as the pieces that go inside the rock. It hasn't scaled anything. It's just exactly the same.
It's not more than the sum of its parts.
In that particular way, right? So some people would do it, Tononi would do it off of integrated information. The different people do it different ways. I think it's all about goal directedness, and Right. I think it doesn't, you know, you're not going to find larger goals that help you deal with the rock. It's basically the same. It follows least action principle. That's about all you're going to get out of it.
Right, right.
So, right. So I think, you know, I think biology is what we roughly call things that are good at it. And that again is a continuum. I think we don't need to spend any time arguing whether something is alive or not. The real question is, so what's your model? What goals do you think this follows, and how does that help you have a richer interaction with the system? And what tools can you bring from active inference, from behavior science, and so on? I mean, look, one example. Okay, one recent example is we showed models of gene regulatory networks, which are just chemicals. It might as well be a rock. It's just you know, 6 or 7 chemicals interacting with each other. And what we showed is that if you bring tools from behavior theory, meaning different kinds of learning, so associative conditioning, habituation, sensitization, you can do some really interesting things with those networks that have lots of biomedical relevance. And you know, it's already there. You don't need a cell. You don't need any, you know, you don't need protoplasm. You don't need any of that. Just the mathematics of having a few nodes connected by these differential equations already give you a bunch of stuff that we would call learning, and that help you, you know. And again, my goal, right? Remember, my goal is not to do poetry and to sort of paint hopes and dreams onto these things, and you know, that we could never agree on. I make a very clear claim that if you know these things, you will do better in the biomedical arena than if you pretend they don't exist. And that's a, you know, that's not a philosophical claim. That's an empirical claim that we can, you know, that we test.
You mean as a scientist or as a creature?
No, as well, both. So first end is so mostly what I talk about in public is the science, right? So I say, as a worker in regenerative medicine, as somebody who wants to discover new ways to use drugs, you will do better if you are able to use the tools of behavioral cognitive science on your cells and tissues than somebody who doesn't. That's the first claim. But you could push it forward and say, you know, in our personal, and I mean, I have no credentials to be, you know, talking about interpersonal, you know, social stuff, but overall, it seems perfectly reasonable to me that we could apply the same reasoning and say, the way that the same pragmatic reasoning to our relationships, and say the way I pick frames for interacting with others is to see how well they work out for me. So purely empirically. So if I treat you as a, you know, as an advanced metacognitive being, we can have a certain kind of relationship, and that elevates me in a certain way. If I do something else, maybe that doesn't work out as well if I take one of the lower, you know, kind of lower framings. So again, just
and it's a way to test. It's a way to test the environment too, right? We're going to go in on the assumption that this is a cognitive being, and we'll see what happens.
And we'll see what happens. I mean, that's the, you know, you can go the other way. You can start and say, okay, I'm going to go on the assumption that it's not, and see what the limitations are. I mean, I prefer the former, but right. as long as everybody's in agreement that this is an empirical undertaking, this is not, we can't just have feelings about this, and this is not something that we're going to argue about for the next 1,000 years and never get anywhere. No, this is getting resolved because, you know, there's clear data. On a human scale, of course, it takes longer, right? So it takes maybe years for someone to say, you know what, my framing isn't working out for me. I'm going to try something different, right? That may take many years, but
it's kind of what's happening in the whole field of plant intelligence, that people are like, let's see what happens if we assume they are cognitive or they have intelligence. And some, you know, some people show that they can learn, some people show they can't. So taking selves to the human dimension, which I've been looking at for this chapter I'm working on. I've been talking to neuroscientists and you know, people like Anil Seth, who's written about selves. One of the things that's curious is, especially in light of what you've proposed in this piece, is we're very invested in the idea of the unchanging self. And it's curious, we don't embrace the idea that this is a completely fungible, you know, subject to our remaking and our creativity. Why do you think we're invested in the idea? It's very hard to conceive of it. I mean, in the definition of self is some continuity, right? Why do you think we're so invested in the idea of a stable, continuous self, which, you know, we're being told by a lot of different discourses is not true?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I can make some hypotheses. I suspect that it's firmware left over from our evolutionary past, because if you were not mm, um, sort of wired to expect object permanence in the outside world, right? Babies acquire it very quickly, and that they have some when they're born. If you don't, if you're not good at seeking out object permanence, and if you're not uh, committed to persistence of your local self, I suspect that on the savannah and whatever the previous versions of that are, I suspect that doesn't play out very well. It's not very good to say, "Go ahead and eat me, lion. My patterns will continue in the universe in another form." Like, great, but
My
I
future self will be undisturbed.
my future self, yeah, I have much bigger bigger thoughts than this. I suppose that doesn't work out too well, right? So I can see why evolution left us with some firmware that tries to kind of dumb it down to this very like basic survival, um for the same. And I think that firmware has a bunch of other stuff that needs to be jettisoned, which is hard. For example, I think a lot of the issues around one reason people don't like this kind of work, right, this kind of diverse intelligence work, is that they worry about false positives. They worry about too many things being considered as if they were cognitive. And I mean, clearly you can make mistakes in that realm. I mean, we have people that are in love with bridges and married to the Eiffel Tower and stuff like this, right? That does happen. But I think what fundamentally drives this is a real deep-seated fear and an assumption that there's not enough love to go around, literally, like that there's it's a zero-sum game in terms of intelligence, and that if we consider other things to be cognitive in some way, well, then mine isn't worth as much, you know. And again, I think that's like ancient scarcity mentality firmware from evolution that says, no, there isn't enough of anything to go around, and there's status, and it's a zero-sum game, and if you don't have the status in your group, you're screwed. And so that's where I think some of this is coming from. um,
That
but
makes
this
a
is
lot
all,
of sense.
that's armchair psychologizing. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, the other reason, I mean, there are variables you want to keep steady, right? And one of the things the self does is help us with homeostasis, right? I mean, if you use the model that Seth talks about, or some other people, that we're always processing signals from our body, and we're looking not to depart from certain, temperature, blood gases. I mean, there's a whole range of things
Yeah.
that we do want to stay in a very narrow range.
Well, yes, and I think that's the part of this firmware that I'm talking about. However, um, from the perspective of the child's body, the adult body is way off on homeostatic properties. From the perspective of the caterpillar, the butterfly, the butterfly is a terrible caterpillar. Like, everything is off. All of that, and I think this is true in embryonic development. From the perspective of the gastrula, the blastula is a birth defect. In fact, I actually think that's how development works. It's a set of repairs
Mm,
activated towards a fast-moving target morphology, which is encoded in bioelectrics and various other things. That basically what happens is, and we've done work on this. This is going to come out later this year. We have some super cool data around this stuff. That basically development is a whole bunch of repairs. I'm not even sure I believe in embryonic development anymore. I think it's all regeneration. I think it's
wow.
all repair. That basically what happens is your target moves faster than the anatomy is trying to catch up. So the target information is here. The anatomy says, oh my God, I'm all wrong. And so all these repair processes kick in, and you make the metamorphosis. By the time you've done that, guess what? The pattern has moved on again, and you're wrong again. So again, you have to change, right? So it's a set of repairs. So you just keep going from stage to stage until you catch up, and that's adulthood, and it's sort of, maturity, and then you sort of catch up. And then you get a different issue with aging. But keeping steady, yes, but everything is transformation, at least until you hit aging. Everything is supposedly a positive transformation, right? You're trying to change into whatever your next form is supposed to be.
Do you think, and I'm asking you to speculate again, there are advantages to giving up on this idea of a stable self?
I think so. I think there are major advantages. Well, let's see. One advantage is that I think that it actually has implications for ethics of behavior, because if if you can if you can sever that sort of hardwired link between your current self and your future self, then one of the things that happens quite naturally is you start to think about other beings' future selves as having similar status. So normally you can be selfish into the future in the sense that, well, that's still going to be me. But if you can understand that future self isn't quite the same as your current self anyway, then you say, well, for the same reasons I care about this future self, for exactly the same reason I ought to be caring about other creatures, let's
That
humans,
really exist.
that future selves, right? Because your future self and all the hard work you're doing to prop up your future self in many ways is not as tightly connected to your current self as we think. And I think breaking that a little bit would be helpful, because then it would make it seem much more rational to then be compassionate to others. Right now it's very natural to invest everything in your future self, but once you realize that you know your future self is a different being in many ways, and it's like there are a number of crazy ways to like weird intuition pumps around this stuff. Like here's a few examples. One thing that people think about, and I think this was maybe Anthony Flu's argument about reincarnation. He said, okay, um, if I'm not going to remember the current life, then what's the difference? You might as well just tell me that I'll be dead and some other kid will be running around somewhere on Earth, and like, good, but there's plenty of kids running around on Earth. What do I care? And so he was trying to say that memory is what keeps it going, right? And the continuity of memory is what keeps it going. But you can imagine things like this. If somebody says to your current self, we're gonna you need some surgery, and you could save some bucks if you instead of having real anesthesia, which you just have as a paralytic. So you'll be paralyzed. We can do our thing. And in fact, I mean, that's a real, like, that actually happens to people, right? That like, it doesn't always work, right?
Right.
So then you can save some bucks. The current self is going to go, well, absolutely not. But the future self, once you come out of it and they say, oh, by the way, oh, and the other thing to know is that when you do get the anesthesia, part of the components is a memory wipe. That's a short-term memory wipe. That's right. Also a real thing, right? Because they don't want you remembering this stuff. So you come out of it and somebody says to you, you know what? I think that actually happened. And when you saved $1,000, but I think you were actually there. I know you don't remember a bit of it, but and at that point, you're like, all right. I mean, now realistically it's an issue because actually the trauma can carry forward, but let's just imagine that, let's imagine the memory wipe actually works. The future self will be like, yeah, I mean, fine,
good deal.
Good deal, right? So there's an interesting thing here, and I think to the extent that we kind of understand that our future self is a construction that is going to sort of try to make sense of these memories and whatever, I think it helps you be kinder to others' future selves because they're in the same boat. So I think for that reason, it's useful. I mean, it's also useful more broadly because to the extent that we understand what we are and how the biology works and everything, I think it really helps us have a more ethical relationship with other beings. Because right now, a lot of people are walking around with this very magical view of what, they say, like, humans do this, and they say, well, which humans, for 100,000 years ago, a million years ago, like which humans, right? And or during embryogenesis, where does this magic sort of kick in? So I think having a better understanding of the biology and what's actually going on is going to help us understand that, gee, there can be other minds that are not the conventional modern human mind, and help us have better relationships with other systems, both biological and also synthetic, artificial, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it would probably make us better people, but on the other hand, this idea of the future self being continuous, that's what gets your work done, right? I mean, this is I'm writing a book. It's going to take me X years. It's going to be really hard, painful, but my future self is going to benefit. when it comes out, when I get my advance, whatever it is. It seems to me there is some adaptive value, and I mean, as you were pointing out on the savannah, of having a strong
Yeah.
sense of self-continuity, even though that
Yeah.
might make you an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's true. There probably is some competitive survival value to it. I think that, you know, look, if okay, I think back to some things I've done in the past, let's say some achievements that I've done in the past.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just me. I have I find it really hard to visualize that was me. Like really,
Mhm.
like I know historically, like if I
Yeah.
look in the record, everybody says it was me and everything, so I know it's me. But thinking back, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I don't remember what it was like. I don't really, it was years ago, so I don't really remember what it was like to do it. And the feeling between me having done it and somebody else having done it is just a historical record at this point, just a matter of historical
Yeah.
record.
Yeah.
I did things before that I probably couldn't do now. So what does that mean? Do I still keep the credit for it? It's, in it's just, society, it helps society to maintain records and to reinforce these things. But really, it's sort of like, it's been a long time. Like, do I really, is it still me that did that?
Yeah.
I don't know, because I don't think I could do it again.
Right.
That kind of stuff. So,
That's so interesting. I mean, to embrace this idea of self as constructing a creative act based on interpretation and misinterpretation of memories, I mean, it's a very exhilarating idea, I think, in many ways, in that people are very stuck on either the positive case for selves, which is a myth, or the case against them, which is just demystification without any sort
yeah,
of positive
yeah.
uh, benefit.
There's a,
Um,
there's
yeah,
an
go ahead.
even, well, just to put on the radar in case you want to talk about it. There's an even weirder, if you think all of that was weird, the bit that I only mentioned in that paper that we could talk about is erasing the distinction between thoughts and thinkers, because
Yeah,
that I think is even more of a profound sort of
yeah. So
trashing.
unpack that a little, because you kind of raced over that idea,
Yeah,
and I think it's really interesting. I mean, I was actually asking this question. I was talking to Anil, and I was saying, can you have a perception without a perceiver, or an inference without an
yeah,
inferrer? And he was
yeah.
saying, yes, you can.
I
But I had a
I
lot of
think you
trouble
can.
getting my head around that.
Yeah, so just to kind of fair warning, these ideas are pretty new, so I'm still kind of chewing all this
Sure.
around. So take everything with a grain of salt. But let's I'll start with a little story, just a short. This is a real science fiction story that I read years ago, and only now am sort of understanding the significance of. But I wish I could remember whose it was. I don't remember. The deal is
Another
that,
self down the drain.
yeah, exactly right. Like I knew at one point, I don't now. Um, these creatures come out of the center of the earth. They're incredibly dense. Yeah, they come out of the core. They're just incredibly dense. They use gamma rays for vision, like super dense. So they come up here, and everything that you and I see here is solid. It's just gas to them. They see because they're so dense. As far as they're concerned, the crust and everything up here is a very rarefied kind of plasma around, right? And
Mhm.
so one of them, so they have some tool. One of them's a scientist, and he's got some tools, and he says to the others, he says, I've been watching this gas that surrounds this planet, and there's some patterns in this gas. There's some persistent patterns in this gas, and they look like they're doing things. They look kind of agential. And so the others of course laugh at him, and they say, no, look, we're real. We are actual thinkers. Patterns can't be thinkers. Patterns in gas can't be thinkers. And he says, no, I'm pretty, like, it looks like they're doing things, and I've done some experiments, and they look like they have certain cognitive properties. And then they ask, well, how long these patterns last? Well, they only last about 100 years. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, 100 years, what could happen? We live millions of years. What could happen in 100 years, right? So, okay. So right away, and you can sort of take this further, you right away, you start to get the idea that the distinction between a temporary but somewhat persistent pattern in an excitable medium and a real solid thing that this is a thing, this is the cognizer. That's a bit of that's in the eye of the beholder, quite a bit. And people who study metabolics will already say that, of course, we're temporary metabolic patterns that exist in there's flux that is sort of self, people who study, kind of these emergent self-reinforcing energy patterns, right? That's how they would describe us anyway. So, okay, so once you start thinking about that, then you can start asking further about the distinction between thoughts as patterns within a cognitive system, and what does it take to spawn off to have thoughts? What does it mean to have thoughts? So once you go down that road, you start to think about, imagine this continuum. So here's a continuum. Fleeting thoughts. So these are patterns that come in and they're gone, right? Persistent intrusive thoughts. So these are thoughts that once you've had them, they are hard to get rid of. And not only are they hard to get rid of, they do a bit of niche construction. I'm sure you know all about this. Is certain kinds of thoughts actually change the brain to make it easier to keep having those thoughts, right? So they're doing a little bit of niche construction. They're modifying their environment to allow themselves to persist and multiply and things like that. You go from there, and there's some kind of exotic intermediates, but the next thing we for sure know about is multiple personality alters. So it's not just a single thought that hangs around. It's like a bundle of thoughts that has some dynamics to it and can actually do some stuff. And then of course there are things that we call full-blown personalities, which are like really consistent, at least for some period of time. They're consistent sets of thoughts. So the thing about the right side of that continuum is that they've done two things. One is they've closed the loop in that they reinforce themselves. So they prop themselves up over time. But the other thing is that they can spawn off other thoughts. So by the time you get to an alter, you've got a cognitive pattern that's complex enough that can spawn off other simpler patterns. And so now you try to draw a distinction between the thought and the thinker, and it's real hard now, because okay, all we're talking about is cognitive patterns, and some of these patterns are in the language of dissipative systems, right? Some of them are just fleeting. Some of them are self-perpetuating, like the red spot of Jupiter and things like this. They sort of keep themselves going, and other patterns spawn off smaller patterns. And other patterns hang around for 100 years, and we give them names, and we,
But don't they need but as you suggested, they need the host of brains, right?
I don't think they, well, so, okay, so this is like very speculative stuff, right? So here we go. First of all, I definitely don't think they need brains, because these kinds of things go on in all sorts of media. So they go on in protoplasm and in cells. I think there's lots of media that they can.
So different substrates, not necessarily just brains.
Exactly,
Living substrates.
Lots of different. Well, we call the substrate living because it's a substrate that is capable of hosting self-reinforcing, goal-driven patterns that have agendas. That's what we call living. But I think you could have, and I'm sure out there in the universe, I'm going to guess there's all kinds of substrates that are capable of that. I think we're going to end up making a whole bunch with different, both software and material science that people are working on. I don't think there's anything special about brains per se for that aspect. But here's the craziest thing, and this is just the latest thing I thought of. That I have zero details to back this up, but I'll just throw this out as a crazy thing. At the beginning of the 1900s, it was thought that self-perpetuating electromagnetic waves, so a pattern that perpetuates for long periods of time, required a material to be waving. You needed an ether that you could say something was waving in order to have a wave.
Right.
We did away with all that. We don't. You can have a pattern propagating with nothing waving. You don't need a material. You got rid of the luminiferous ether because you found out that the two components, the magnetic and the electric component, they can sort of reinforce each other, and this thing sort of propagates. So I wonder, and again, I'm not saying I believe this. I'm just saying this is something I'm toying with at the moment. I wonder if you could make a move like that. You could get rid of this cogniferous ether, aka brains or whatever else, and you could have patterns that are actually self-reinforcing in the absence of all of that. I don't know what physical model you would have. I think we need to think more about this.
Doesn't seem like you need a physical model.
Correct. Correct. The reason you, well, the first thing that'll happen is people will say this is dualism, and fair
Or
enough.
idealism, actually.
Or idealism. Yeah, fair enough. I think that's true. And I think some of the stuff we talked about before about the practicalities of Platonic space and the patterns that are there. Like, I think this is in that same vein. And I think, yes, those things are not physical. And I think they're real in the sense that they make a huge difference about what happens next and so on. The reason you need some kind of a physical story at some point is that you need to flesh out a story about the interaction with physical bodies. So what is it that happens when evolution produces or an engineer produces some kind of physical machine? What's the interaction between those patterns that come to resonate? And so some people will, somebody will say incarnate. I will say, Richard Watson will say resonate. Who knows? But when it comes to these kind of patterns that are embodied in a physical machine, we need some kind of story about what happens there, because otherwise, they sort of remain off in this
I see.
nonsense,
So they have to
right?
encounter something.
They have to, yeah. And we're actually doing work. So this is not published yet, but we're actually doing some stuff on how you could basically at this point. I think that the idea of an unchanging, permanent sort of Platonic space where everything just is sort of fixed there. I think it's much more interesting than that. I think there is a chemistry of these things in that space, and I think we have a computational way to start doing experiments there. And I have a student working on some stuff. So stay tuned. There'll be
That's
some
wild.
stuff about that. It is completely wild. Looking at agentic properties in sets of logical sentences. Just sentences. Some of them are passive and some of them are not. Some of them do things by themselves, and it's really interesting. But that's what I want to going back to the whole butterfly caterpillar thing. I think that you can think about this thing as you've got the left side of it's a bow, it's an hourglass / bow tie thing where you've got there's intelligence on the left side that takes all of these different experiences and generalizes and abstracts to some sort of compressed engram. You've got the creative, intelligent part on the right side that has to reinflate it into whatever the current context is and figure out what the memories mean. But again, all of that first way of telling the story assumes that the information is passive and that all the intelligence is in the hardware. What if the data itself is not actually passive? What if these are patterns, as we were just talking about, and patterns that are using the medium of the physical process from caterpillar to butterfly, right? To perpetuate and transform themselves. And what if they're doing a bit of niche construction to make sure that they perpetuate and actually, do better, right? As a butterfly, you've got some advantages that you can have. So I don't know, that goes back to our the self-sorting data in the algorithms, right? The sorting algorithms, where the distinction between the data and the algorithm is really very much in the eye of the beholder. And if you look for it, you can find the data doing things.
How could you prove that there's agency in information?
Well, the way you prove agency in anything, I think, is you show again, and this is a kind of an engineering take, is you show how doing so helps you do something new. How right? So how does it help you, right? It's the my argument is that back in the olden days when people said there's a spirit under every rock, versus now where the scientists say there isn't any anywhere. But both of those things are wrong, because they're just you have to do experiments and you have to say, here is my theory, here's what it does for me. So here's what we're doing for this for the sorting algorithms thing. What we found, and this was just the first thing we looked for, so no, I gotta think there's more, but we just haven't found it yet. The first thing we found is we found these algorithms doing stuff that is not explicitly in the algorithm. They are doing things specifically. They're doing this clustering behavior that are not in the algorithm. So there are no steps to do that in the algorithm. Now, when you're looking at an algorithm, it has a cost to it. Every computation costs something. So what we see is that there's an algorithm. The computer's carrying out this algorithm that you pay an energy toll to do all the, but it's also doing something else. And it looks to me like it's doing that for free. So here's how I would do it. And I have somebody in my lab who's working on this right now, is to harness that to some other task that's actually useful. Because if you can do that, that second task is getting done for free without paying an energy bill for it. Now, I mean, obviously that sounds impossible. I understand that, and it may well turn out to be impossible. But that's the kind of thing you have to show an example where, okay, I took seriously the idea that this thing had its own goal-directed activity. I harnessed that goal-directed activity to, it's like the donkey with the carrot on the stick, right? By understanding what the drivers of this agent are, I can harness it to do useful work. And if I can do more useful work per unit of cost for compute than somebody else who doesn't believe it, I mean, that's it. There's no more to be had than empirical success. So that's the kind of thing that I think we're gonna have to do.
That's great. That's fascinating. So you need memories to have a self, yes? Can you have a self without memory?
You can have a selflet. You can have you can have a slice. I do think, and this is like going beyond anything that I can usefully sort of show. There's just the thoughts there that thin slices are they do have experience, and they probably do have some sort of consciousness associated with them. But if you don't have carry through, then you become fleeting thoughts. You become a set of fleeting thoughts, basically, as opposed to a coherent reinforcing pattern.
Right, that you could make a story out of.
Yeah.
So you just used the C word, and you used it several times in this paper. After last time, years ago when we met, you were like conspicuously avoiding it.
Yeah.
And there's a really provocative sentence. If maybe you could just unpack a little for me. Could consciousness simply be what it feels like to be in charge of constant self-construction, driven to reinterpret all available data in the service of choosing what to do next? So tell me how you're thinking about consciousness.
Yeah, and so I still largely avoid it, because what I don't have is a full-blown new theory of consciousness that I'm prepared to defend strongly. I'm working on.
Nobody does. Well, I mean, a lot of people think they do, but
yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. There's a lot of people who are willing to sort of get out with it. I don't have anything like that yet, but here's what did strike me. Mark Solms, whose work on this I really like,
me too.
has this interesting point of view that he thinks that he says that consciousness is palpated uncertainty about the future. So the idea is that consciousness is what it feels like to have to be in charge of knowing what to do next. This idea that this leads to connected to active inference, and what do these patterns mean? What can I expect next? How do I minimize my surprise? These things. So here's another hypothesis. What if, yes, all that is true, but there's an even deeper problem, which is that as a conscious agent, not only do you not know what to do next, you don't even know what your own memories mean. You have the constant burden of having to reinterpret your own memories all the time. And of course it's subconscious. If this is something we had to do consciously, we would never make it. But it's a little bit like, people who have brain damage and can't form new memories. You wake up in the morning and there's a notepad next to your bed, and it says, hey, guess what? You can't form new memories. Here's where things stand. And by the way, before you go to bed tonight, write the next note. And so, so I mean, that's what all of us do. But for all of us, that scratch pad is internal. But for ant colonies and certain kinds of patients, you have to externalize those memories somehow. So I think that we're all kind of in that boat, in that every so many milliseconds, you have to be able to, you have to reconstruct the story of who you are, what your plans were, right? And we don't notice it because it has to be automatic, otherwise
we notice it when we wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
There's an interesting moment of reconsolidation of self.
Yep. There is. And I wonder if this is the problem with trying to make sense of our dreams too, is that, and I'm no expert on dreams, but I wonder if part of the issue is that at night you don't really do a super good job of memories in a way that your future self is going to decode them, and that's the crazy dreams where you can't even figure out what the heck it was. It's basically because you're looking at these anagrams going, I can't make heads or tails of this, and
Right.
it's just more difficult than waking memories. I don't know, that's a hypothesis, but I wonder, for consciousness, I think Mark is right, but I also think that there's an even deeper task facing selves, conscious selves, which is that you can't even really rely on the past. It's you have to reconstruct it all the time. You have to figure out what you are and recommit to being an agent doing things. So that was my hypothesis.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating idea. Of course, and we haven't talked about the social world, but that is helping us in a funny way and constraining us, right? I mean, you're being told who you are all the time by the people
Yeah.
around you,
Yep.
who kind of keep you in certain roles
Yep.
and limit your ability to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a softening of self that happens when you're not in a social environment, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought about this too with regard to psychedelics, which have interesting effects on the self and on memory. All sorts of stuff comes up. People talk about a period of ego dissolution, a complete loss of sense of self, yet they're still conscious. And then this kind of putting things together in a new way, I mean, especially with the trauma victims who are treated, they take out their memories, difficult memories, and when they reconsolidate them, they're not the same. They've lost the emotional charge or whatever it is. I mean, there's a kind of very interesting process of playing with your memories in psychedelic experience so that you end up being a slightly different self when you come out. If it's working. I mean, that's kind of the theoretical model is get you out of your habitual ways of looking at things and those kind of rumination. I mean, those sort of the thoughts you were describing that take up residence in your brain that you might not necessarily want.
That's super interesting, and I wonder if there is a clinical path here by taking seriously the idea that some of those thoughts may not want to leave, like literally, right?
Yeah.
And there may be some.
That is trauma. I mean, that's part of trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, but I wonder if taking seriously their ability to process information, maybe not in the same way as a full-blown alter, but still not passive data, but actually a pattern that can, a dissipative system that can actually process information. It may. I don't know anything about this, so maybe this is totally nuts, but I've heard various kinds of alternative therapists and whatnot, wanting you to talk to your different, with this, but so that may not be crazy. There may be, right? There may be, if these patterns can process information to some extent, there may be stimuli you can give them where basically you're not just treating the brain to somehow take care of this, although that may work too, but you're actually maybe there is something to be said for communicating.
Well, this is the theory in treating schizophrenia. Yes,
really?
you are hearing voices. Why don't you talk to them, or why don't you let me talk to them? And if you think about it, memories of trauma do process information because you get, you hear a gunshot or something now, and it's processed as that, or a siren or whatever it is. So they are still active in your brain in an interesting way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very suggestive. I'm going to let you go in a second. I just have one or two more questions. Well, this kind of relates to that psychedelic point, but it's interesting that we cherish ourselves and we talk about self-esteem and building up the self, with our kids. And we're very wedded to the idea of, as I said earlier, this unchanging, enduring self. Yet at the same time, we spend a lot of effort trying to transcend it and escape ourselves. Whether it's through drugs is one way, but also travel, experiences of awe that we know kind of diminish the self, religion, giving yourself over to the group. Why do you think we also want to transcend selves?
I think I don't know, but I think that probably there are competing drives. So there's the evolutionary firmware that says defend yourself at all costs, right? I think
Right.
that's got to be in there. But there may well be an opposing component that says yes, but if you stand still, you're also not going to make it. So it's like with active inference, there's this thing surprise minimization, right? So
Right.
but the easiest way not to be surprised is to stick your head in the corner and not look at anything, and then
Right.
there will be one final surprise at the end when somebody eats you, but that's it. Until then, you're not surprised. So so there's got to be, I think, in biology, there's got to be two competing drives. One is surprise minimization and one is exploration, where it says, if you haven't seen anything new in a long time, you might be stuck in a corner. You better do something else, right? And so maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's like, yes,
Yeah.
defend yourself, but also if you're too stuck and you haven't learned anything new and you haven't improved and you haven't whatever, then and I don't know if that's something that's comes from the biology itself, or meaning just a drive with actual selective advantage, or whether that's some sort of a consequence of being an advanced being that has some sort of semi-spiritual drive to improve over time or something.
Right. Right.
You know,
You
some,
familiar with the dichotomy? This is another binary between exploring and exploiting.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it kind of reminds me of that idea that there is a
yeah.
desire. I mean, we spend a lot of time in exploit mode as adults,
Mm-hmm.
um, but we also need to do the exploration,
Yeah.
and that's the exploit mode has the strongest sense of self.
Yes. Yes.
Psychologists would say, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that
Um,
makes sense. And I wonder if aging on the cellular level, if aging is a part of that. You know,
how so?
uh, well, you chase the moving target morphology as an embryo, and eventually you reach your adult form, and sort of that's it. You've caught up, and so now the name of the game is to defend against tiny local defections of cancer and degeneration and so just cells getting old and so on.
Hmm.
But if once you've given up that you're on a trajectory for some kind of construction project, maybe that's it. If you're stuck in a rut of exploit and you're really not exploring anything, that may be when things start to go to pot. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
the kind of familiar folk example is the people who retire from their job and then immediately drop dead, right? So
Right.
that's the right that's just kind of a but maybe something like that is going on a cellular level, where basically when there's nothing pulling you, there is no more of that the forces, which is what we study during development, that pull you from stage to stage. At that point, then things start to go downhill. I don't know.
Yeah. I noticed in your acknowledgments, which was a fascinating list, I read it. Bernardo Kastrup was in there.
Yeah.
Tell me about. I'm talking to him tomorrow. I've never
Oh,
met him.
cool. Oh yeah. We've had I've had a couple of conversations with Bernardo online, and a bunch off. Yeah, super interesting dude. Computer science kind of background, philosophy. He's got this kind of idealist model. Yeah, I think he's very interesting. He did a cool session with Rupert Spira, and they sort of talked about this notion of all of us being dissociative alters of the great cosmic mind and things like that. Yeah, I think you'll have fun. I think he's a very smart guy. I think you'll have fun.
I find I'm reading his book right now. He has a new book that he sent me a copy of. The epistemology piece seems very persuasive. I mean, the more we learn about active inference and the fact that we're constructing, our perceptions are limited by our cognitive equipment, and
Mm.
the world we're seeing is mental to a greater extent than we realize. But then he goes to the next step, that what's really there is mind. And that's what I don't understand that. He sort of asserts it without arguing it.
Well, he's got I think 5 other books that
Yeah, I know. I have to read
he's
more.
probably leaning on, and I'm not going to try to kind of make his argument for him, because I think I'll butcher it. He'll do a much better job of it himself. You can ask him to just like say it, but I think that fundamentally I like that idealist position, in the sense that I think what actually propagates through evolution, through the universe, I think the fundamental pieces are perspectives. So I don't think it's genes. I don't think it's bodies. I think it's perspectives. And so, well, what I mean is that any agent, you can't afford to you can't afford to try to see the world as it is, in the sense of like a Laplacian demon. You can't afford to track microstates, because if you try to track microstates, by the time you figure out what's going on, you'll be long dead. Any biological system that in the real world has constraints of energy, of time. So what that means is you're going to coarse grain. You're going to decide, what am I ignoring? What am I paying attention to? I'm going to take all these kinds of observations and I'm just going to lump them all together, and I'm going to call it, and I don't mean, this is not just humans doing this, is every cell, every bacterium, everything's doing this. So what you really have there then is a perspective. It's a commitment to, it's a set of choices that say, here's what I'm paying attention to, and here's how I make sense of it. Here's what I think it means. It's an interpretation. So that's what I think is perpetuating through the universe and being selected on, and altering with time and all that, is a set of perspectives, a particular vantage point of saying, here's how I make sense of my world. And once we understand that every cognitive being is limited, every real being is finite, we're all limited, we all have to choose a perspective that ignores all kinds of other stuff. And it's not just about only being able to sense a small narrow band of the spectrum. It actually, I mean, that's true too, but it's much more than that. It's cognitively, not just perceptually, that we're limited. Then I think then it's all about what we're.
But really are you talking about perspectives in the minds of living things, or are you talking about perspectives at large?
I'm talking about perspectives. I mean, we can talk about what living things are, but I think that any agent that has to, whether we would call it living or not, I mean, any kind of robotic thing, any kind of system that solves problems in a world of some sort, is going to have a perspective on that world. And the more, right, for a rock, you don't worry too much about its perspective, although with potential energy and things like that, you almost kind of get there. But for most things that have a significant inner perspective, we call those things living, typically, but it doesn't have to be. And whatever world they, you can ask, like, gene regulatory networks, what's the world that they navigate? It's not the physical three-dimensional world. It's a high-dimensional transcriptional space that they live in. And I think from that, from no pun intended, from that perspective, what ends up being emphasized a lot more is, what choices are you making about your cognitive framing of your world, and a lot less about some objective world existing out there somewhere. And I think that's how you get to idealism, is just by recognizing that all real agents are going to be finite and limited, and therefore what you're really talking about is an inner world that you're building for yourself. It's your own self model that's at play here, not some objective thing, and that your self model your model of the world may or may not be compatible with mine.
Yeah. So in your view, though, I'm assuming something, but I could be wrong. The prerequisites of self and the process you're describing, do you think that can be embodied in a computer?
Yes, but computer has to, I mean, again, whether something or not is a computer is in the eye of the beholder. What we mean when we say something is a computer is that I have a set of conceptual tools that I bring to the table here that come from computer science, and I'm claiming that those tools are useful. That's all it means. And do I think that some of those tools are useful to understand cognition? Yes. For example, reprogrammability in software, I think is extremely useful. Do I think the von Neumann architecture and the sharp distinction between data and the machine are particularly useful? No, I think we'll have to dump those. Do I think that at some point we could make synthetic beings that have the right features? Absolutely. I don't see any reason why. It seems completely backwards to me to say that the blind meanderings of the evolutionary process can create real minds, but intelligent engineers who understand how minds work can't do it. That seems crazy to me. So I think that for sure, once we understand, and I think we're getting there, I think we understand a few of the key features. I don't see any reason why we couldn't re-implement them in a synthetic substrate. Sure.
Yeah, but you need a substrate that, as you've said, is not at all like a von Neumann.
Correct.
Gene, right?
Correct. I think you need a number of things, and the thing is that I started writing those things down. I started writing a paper. This was a few, months ago. I started writing a paper to say, look, these are the things we've learned from biology. If you just do these things, you will have a real agent. And then I stopped, and although I don't think this is going to solve it, because somebody else will of course do it, but I didn't want to be responsible for it, because I think that to whatever extent that's on the right track, it may or not be, but if it is, then what that means is that it makes it very easy to make trillions of other beings that deserve moral consideration. And I'm not really interested in being the cause of that, but I'm sure that's where we're going. I'm sure this will get figured out, and this is what will happen.
Yeah, other people are working on it.
Oh yeah,
including Mark Selves, by the way.
Yes, that's right. And
project.
That's right.
And I would say very simplistic, and it's using computers as they now exist.
Yeah, I think that I think of anybody's project that I think has a chance of doing something like that, I think his is at the top of the list. I actually think he could do it. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you. Are you writing a book, a trade book?
I am. I'm currently One Pagan and I are writing a book on bioelectricity, and it doesn't have any of this stuff in it. It's just straight up bioelectricity. But the next book, if I get there, the next book will be all of this stuff, basically.
Great.
Yeah, evolution, cognition, all that stuff.
And are you going to do that for a general audience?
I don't know. We're still so Richard Watson and I are probably going to do it together, or maybe we'll do two books. We haven't been able to, like, maybe it'll be two books back to back or something. We'll have, maybe inverted, like the way that that was done for the Planaria journal and all that. I don't know. I'm having a really hard time figuring out what is the best thing to do here, because on the one hand, I could do a book for a general audience, and I think what would happen then is that a lot of these there will be a set of people from, let's say, the alternative sort of new age kind of community who would read these things and they say, oh yeah, no kidding, we've known this for a long time, and they don't need scientific sort of experiments to prove it, whatever. They're already in for it. And then there will be the science community who will say, well, there's not enough meat here to convince me of any of these crazy things, right? So I worry about that issue for the trade book. It sounds like that could miss the impact. On the other hand, if we do an academic press book where you go into detail on all of this stuff, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure which of my colleagues have time to read something like that. Who's going to read it? I don't know. So I still haven't figured out what the right.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got a really interesting book around some of these ideas, and I think it'd be of interest to a lot more than New Age people. I really do. Do you have a literary agent?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. I mean, it's a conversation to have with that person. Is it it Brockman's shop? Or
it is. Yeah,
like
yeah. Dan introduced me to Brockman. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We'll have a I mean, he obviously wants a trade book. All right. So
sure.
Now the other thing is, they don't, which is kind of wild. They don't like images, and they certainly don't like color. I have some amazing color illustrations, and I don't know. That feels weird to me in this modern day and age with computer. Like, do we even need a book? Couldn't I just put it all on a website? Like, why do we need a book? I don't, and somebody's going to tell you not to use color. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that. I just think that these ideas would be of interest to a lot of people in a lot of different fields. They're very interdisciplinary ideas.
Yeah.
And so I think the right trade book would reach your colleagues or colleagues in other, in philosophy and computer science. Anyway, it's just fascinating stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll be in touch because I will definitely want to pick your brain when it comes
time.
Happy
to. I'm happy to read a proposal if you do that or whatever.
Yeah, I'd love
any kind of suggestions.
That'd be super useful. Thank you.
Good. And I'm going to be in Cambridge this fall, so
awesome.
I'll look you up
and
we can get together in person.
Definitely. Yeah, we'll hang out.